Today we've got a crazy nuclear revenge story of somebody getting their mom imprisoned. We'll get to that in a bit, but first, my sister from heck. I really don't remember a time when my sister Jade was never a pain in my butt. There must have been a time, but I simply don't recall it. To my parents, we were just siblings bickering, and they would always try to make us make up after every fight. But to me, my sister was just evil. One of my earliest memories of my sister's meanness towards me was of my sister actually pushing me out the door and locking it behind me. I was 7 and I kept trying to get in. When I couldn't get back in after a while, I just sat down outside the kitchen door and cried till my mom heard me and came down to get me. When my sister was asked why she had done what she did, she had sheepishly said she didn't know I was outside, and she apologized to my parents. Later though, she had whispered to me that she had hoped someone would kidnap me. I hadn't even heard of the word kidnap till that point, and when I finally asked my teacher what the word meant and she told me, I didn't think anything of it. I knew that my sister had enjoyed my parents' full attention before I was born, and I thought maybe she was just jealous of the fact that she had to share that attention. To be honest, jealousy was probably how the whole thing started, but as the years went on, it honestly became more sinister, and she became borderline evil. Why would I say she was evil? Well, let me tell you a little story about when we went to summer camp. So when I was 10 and she was 13, we went to a camp during summer vacation. The camp lasted for 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks were perhaps the worst of my entire life. See, at home, Jade had to mask her hatred of me at least a little bit. My parents were very watchful, and my dad especially had started to pick up on some of the things I was facing, and had even scolded Jade a few times over her behavior, so she was mostly passive-aggressive to me at home. With us at camp with no supervision from our parents, Jade was ready to rain down her entire disregard for me. The first thing Jade did was tell everyone that I wasn't her sister, which was fine, I guess. Lots of kids do that. What I wasn't expecting was her telling people that I was an orphan with a very serious disease who was just temporarily staying with her family till the government figured out what to do with me. The most absurd thing about that rumor was the fact that somehow it actually stuck. Many of the kids didn't want to talk to me because they were scared that I'd transmit my imaginary disease to them, and my hopes of making a lot of friends at camp were instantly dashed. I tried as much as possible to prove that I was in fact Jade's sister and I wasn't sick, but you know kids, once they've made up their minds about something, it's final. I was still determined to make the most out of a bad situation and have as much fun as possible, but again, my sister had other plans. So usually some children would sneak out of the campgrounds to go into the woods and swim in the lake, or in the case of a little boy named Simon, track deer. We had been warned to not sneak out as we could get hurt or lost. I really didn't have anyone to talk to except one of the camp counselors. So I was shocked when one of the girls Jade hung out with told me they were sneaking out that afternoon and asked if I wanted to come with. I was very skeptical about it first, but after a fair amount of convincing, I was in. When Jade saw that I was coming, she looked absolutely upset. She wrinkled her nose like I was spoiled milk and straight out told me to stay back. I was ready to do just that when other people on her friend group said it was okay if I joined, so I stayed back. When we got to the lake, we hung around playing and swimming. We made sure there was a lookout so we'd know if anyone was coming and scram. I didn't feel very comfortable in the water, so I hung around the shore. Suddenly, my sister came to me and said she wanted to talk to me away from everyone else. I followed. We went off for a bit, and she told me she had seen this very cool cave she wanted us to explore. Naive as I was, I got excited. Perhaps it wouldn't be a bad idea to actually spend time with Jade without us fighting constantly. Maybe we could be like regular siblings and love and support each other. Maybe this little adventure was our own start to a relationship that was normal. When we got to a valley, she told me the cave was just straight down and she was right behind me. If you guessed that she left me walking around in the woods and went back to the lake, you'd be right. When I realized I was lost, I tried my best to retrace my steps, but the more I tried to find my way out, the more lost I was. Evening came and I was still absolutely lost. To make things worse, I had spotted a bear walking about 50 meters away once, and I was absolutely terrified of being attacked by it. After a while of searching for a way out and not finding any, I stayed where I was and just kept crying till I fell asleep. When one of the camp counselors who was part of the search party for me found me later that night, I was still asleep. After the trauma of that incident, I didn't want to stay at camp again, and I requested that my parents come pick me up the next day. After the camp incident, I became even more cautious of Jade. Up to that point, I'd believed that she was just acting out of jealousy, but now I was certain that she was just pure evil. That wouldn't be the last thing she would do though. I have a pollen allergy and sometimes it gets really bad. My symptoms are quite typical: sneezing, dry throat, itchy skin and all, and usually a nasal spray is enough to help me feel better once I start feeling bad. Generally though, I avoid going out without a mask on during pollen season. One time during pollen season, I kept having repeated allergies even when I was in the house, and I was certain that there was no way they could get in. Day after day it got worse, and it got to the point where I permanently wore face masks around the house and personally vacuumed every single day, but it still didn't let up. I was certain that Jade had something to do with this, but I didn't know how. One particular day, my allergies started flaring and I instantly reached for my nasal spray, but it wasn't at my bedside table. I ran to the kitchen thinking that perhaps I'd left it on the kitchen counter without knowing, but it wasn't there either. At this point, I was starting to get a little panicky. Jade and I were the only ones at home, so I rushed to her room to ask if she knew where my nasal spray was. I knew she heard me asking because I heard her walk to the door, lock it, and then about 15 seconds later, she turned on her Bluetooth speakers and started singing along to the song that was blaring. I could feel the allergic reaction getting worse, so I tried calling both our parents. They must have been busy because they didn't pick up. Now I was sensing that I was inching towards anaphylaxis, which is basically a severe allergic reaction. Scared that I might pass out, or worse, I picked up the phone and called 911. The last thing I remember before I passed out was telling them my address. When I woke up at the hospital, my dad was there with a very somber-looking Jade. She had, through tears, told me she was sorry she hadn't paid attention to me. She said she thought I was faking. However, I knew every word out of her mouth was a lie. She knew what she was doing, and she was only sorry that she couldn't come up with a good excuse. Plus, I suspected that she was responsible for my nasal sprays suddenly going missing. So while I smiled, I knew what she was really up about. After that day, I started keeping sprays hidden around the house and my room, just to make sure I had never had to experience what Jade made me go through that day again. For years after, I would do everything in my power to avoid her. Somehow, I managed to make it to 9th grade without her finding a way to end me. She was in the final year of high school at this time, and I had hoped that she would somehow find a university far, far away. In my opinion, no place could be far enough, and I'd finally be rid of her for most of the year. It was during this time that she finally crossed the line. See, my parents had been worried about our dynamic and how it would affect us as we grew, so they suggested that we all see a therapist. We would go as a group and individually. Now, when we showed up at the therapist's office, Jade would act like an absolute angel in an attempt to win the therapist over. I really hoped that her facade was obvious and the therapist could see through it all, but I couldn't really tell if she did. I, on the other hand, would barely talk when we were together as a group. Mostly because I really didn't want to express how I really felt about my sister in front of my parents, and I didn't want to have to put up a fake screen of being happy when I wasn't. During individual sessions, though, I was more open and I spoke to the therapist about all my sister's antics. Something told me she was concerned about me, and she would often try to find out if I wanted to harm Jade or myself. I made it clear that for all of her meanness, I really wasn't interested in attacking my sister. I just wanted her as far away from me physically as possible. We discussed other things too: school, my life, my hopes and dreams, even some of my intrusive thoughts. I felt really confident talking to her, and I felt like I could drop the weight that I was constantly carrying whenever I entered her office. God forbid anyone else knew the things I told my therapist, and that was exactly what happened. I got to school one day to weird looks from everyone. At first, I thought someone had pranked me or something, so I checked myself to make sure there wasn't a kick me sign or something on me. When I was certain that there wasn't, I started staring back, which seemed to work a bit. Eventually though, one of my friends had pulled me into the bathroom and asked if I knew that there was a few recordings of me that had been going around. I was confused and wondered what she could possibly be talking about, till she took out her phone and played recordings of the discussions my therapist and I had. I broke down instantly. I felt so betrayed. Those were my most personal thoughts. My bared soul now accessible to the whole world. I ran right out of school and headed straight to my therapist, crying the entire way. When I got there, I confronted her, called her some pretty colorful names. She was confused the whole time. When she had calmed me down, I told her what had happened, and she was even more puzzled until she did a search of her office and found a remote-controlled recording device on one of her bookcases. Everything started to click immediately. Jade had her sessions right before mine. Of course she'd been recording my sessions and had released it all in a bid to embarrass me. I was furious with rage. The therapist said that she would call my parents, and I told her not to and picked up the recording device. I was finally ready to deal with this myself. Jade was cocky. She was so cocky, she didn't care if anyone discovered her recorder. She didn't expect that I'd want to pay her back. She didn't even act like she knew anything about what had happened in school, so I decided it would be nice to pay her in her own coin. I planted the recorder in her room, and boy does that girl talk. Over the next few weeks, I'd heard her plan and scheme, sneak in 2 boys, and even use drugs. When I was satisfied with what I'd recorded, I created a very detailed folder filled of all sorts of incriminating evidence against her. I sent a few to our parents from an anonymous email. Nothing too bad, just her sneaking in a guy and choking from a really long rip of weed. My parents were obviously furious, and she got into a lot of trouble. She was grounded, had her phone taken away, and had many privileges taken away. But that wasn't enough for me. I also sent a few more recordings to her classmates and principal, which exploded a whole lot. Within 2 weeks, she was on indefinite suspension, and my parents were looking for another school to transfer her to. She must have put 2 and 2 together because she came to my room angrily one day, asking how I dared to do something like that. I smiled, looked up at her, and told her I had so much more, and if she didn't get off my back, I could get her in even more serious trouble, possibly even police trouble. Mind your business and don't mess with me, and with any luck, she'd be far away in a few months. She fumed and left my room, but I was sure she got the message. It's been a few years since she graduated from high school, and I haven't caught a whiff of her. I really wish I didn't have to go to such extreme measures, but it was worth it in the end, so I have no regrets. I mean, what happened to this sister in the end probably is fairly light considering they almost, let's say, dispatched their sibling forever, permanently. Our next story is, I got my mom imprisoned. Growing up, I loved my mother. Like really, really loved her. My earliest memories of my mom were absolute bliss. From going to the park twice a week, to family dinners at local restaurants with my dad, and a lot of playing at home, I was quite happy. I always saw my parents as my heroes. They were funny, kind, and always listened to everything I had to say. Their marriage also seemed quite perfect, even from the inside. They had this look of not just love, but understanding they often gave each other. It was like they had a single mind. They worked together as a team, and I always felt safe with them. For some reason though, we weren't enough for my mom. I would learn at the age of 10 just how much of my mom's seeming love for my father and I was a facade, and my life would change forever. One day after school, I went straight home as I always do. Usually I pick the spare key we keep in the fake rock and go in. The next few hours is typically spent doing homework, watching TV, and waiting for my parents to get home from work. This particular day, however, when I got home, the door was already open. Scared that someone had broken in, I was cautious going in. I opened the door slowly and left the entrance open, so in case someone was in, I could just run straight out. I was only a few steps in when I heard voices upstairs, and I would have bolted except for the fact that one of the voices I heard was my mom's. I inched closer, still cautious, but with a little more confidence now. On the stairs, I heard the second voice, which I was sure was definitely male, say that he was certain that he had heard something and that he should go check. I was almost at the door of my parents' room when my mom opened the door and looked shocked to see me. She was out of breath and she had a bathrobe on. Now, 10-year-old me wasn't the smartest person out there, but I certainly wasn't dumb either. I'd already started to figure out what was going on. Mom tried to seem unsuspicious and asked how school was. I ignored her question and instead asked why she was home this early and who I'd heard talking. I saw her panic a bit and then she tried to cover it all up, saying she was alone and maybe I was hearing things. She then said that if I'd like to get some ice cream, I should wait downstairs while she got ready. Not knowing what else to do, I went downstairs. I heard panicked whispers and then the sound of someone landing in the bushes. I immediately rushed to the window to see one of our neighbors from down the street running away from the house while simultaneously trying to wear his shirt. On the ride to the store, my mom repeatedly asked if I was okay. I said yes. For a week, I kept my mom's secret. It killed me inside to know that I was sitting on information like that, but I was aware that so much would happen if I told my dad. I'd seen a couple of my classmates' parents go through divorces, and I knew that they were messy and affected everyone negatively. However, the longer I held on to the secret, the heavier the weight of guilt was on me. One day, when my dad and I were watching TV together, I felt so overwhelmed I started crying right there. My dad was concerned and asked me what was going on, so I just spilled it all right there, sobbing through half of the story. When I was done telling him what I saw, he asked if I was sure of what I saw, and I said yes. That evening, he confronted my mom, and after a long fight, he left the house. And I didn't see him till the next evening. When he came back, he picked a few of his things up and told me he'll need a little time away from mom, and that he was trying to see if he could sort things out. He apologized for everything and assured me that the rift between him and my mom was not my fault, and that I'd made the right decision by telling him what I saw. On the other hand, I saw a side of my mom I'd never seen before. She was very angry at me, to the point of even physically hitting me, and she would scream that I was a destructive child who was intent on ruining her marriage. She started drinking quite heavily, and I was scared for my safety. I was so traumatized during this time that my grades started to drop. I didn't tell my dad all the mean things my mom said, but I did tell him about the alcohol use, and he promised that he'd try his best to protect me no matter what. My parents' divorce was extremely horrible. There was no sign of the love that they were usually so expressive with. That had changed to extreme hurt and anger, and they just could not settle out of court. Eventually, the court dissolved my parents' marriage, and in an unusual move, gave custody of me to my dad instead of my mom. Apparently, her abuse of alcohol was a big determining factor in that. My mom got the house though, so I had to move out. I was actually quite glad to leave the house because things between my mom and I had gotten really bad, and she was always cold towards me. She would refuse to take me to school, would sometimes forget to make meals for me, and she would scold and ground me for absolutely no reason at all. When I moved in with my dad, things were much better. My dad was the same man I always knew, and he continued to treat me like his little angel. He was always present for every PTA meeting, every play, everything my mom was now suddenly unavailable for. He became my confidant, and we were basically best friends. My mom, on the other hand, was supposed to have me over once in a while, but she never came to pick me up, or once when she saw me on the street, she didn't even say hello. Eventually, I accepted the fact that my mom was now a completely different person than I'd known my whole life till that point. Over the next few years, my dad and I got even closer. Since he decided not to date again, I didn't ever have to bother about whether or not I'd have a stepmom, and I was completely fine with that. We spent a lot of time together, especially during the holidays and during summer vacation. We would hike and run together, and when I started playing chess, he was my first tutor till I got a lot stronger and needed a better tutor. One day though, my dad came home looking sad. When I asked what was wrong, he said he was fine and that I didn't have to worry. Well, it turns out that he wasn't fine. My dad had 4th stage cancer and he only had a few months left to live. We tried everything to save his life. Chemotherapy, novel experimental treatments, everything. With every passing day though, it seemed clearer and clearer that I was going to lose my dad. The thought of it alone broke me, and I spent countless days crying about it. During his final days, when he had to be taken into hospice care, I went to stay with his parents, who happened to only live 30 minutes away. One Saturday morning with my grandparents, a few friends and family, excluding my mom and I, we said our last goodbyes to my dad. He was so weak he could barely move, and the only sign that he knew we were there were his watery eyes. Later that day, he passed. It remains the saddest day in my life, and I don't recall ever crying so much in my life. I had to be pried out of the room and lightly sedated before my grandparents took me home. Now, I had assumed that upon my dad's death, I would remain with my grandparents, who were really cool people. I was absolutely wrong about that, as my mom again sued for custody. I was absolutely shocked that she was even interested in having me back, seeing as she'd been completely absent the past 4 years. Somehow, she won the case, and I had to move back in with her. No sooner had I unpacked my bags, I discovered why she wanted me under her roof once again. She wasn't over blaming me for her and my dad splitting, and she wanted revenge. The moment I moved in, she blocked almost all contact between me and the outside world. She punished me for every little deed, even if it was something as innocuous as, and believe this, doing the dishes. And she would verbally abuse me whenever she felt like. I felt awful, and I always tried to stay out of her sight. There were only a handful of things that kept me sane, and chess was one of those things. You see, when my dad was healthy, he'd enrolled me with a chess tutor who was an international master, and I'd become quite good and had played in a few regional tournaments. I had done pretty well, and I was preparing for my first national tournament a few months away. After my dad had died, my grandparents had gifted me with one of the best presents ever. They had continued to pay for my tutoring. Almost every minute I spent in my room was spent practicing and training with opponents online. I was intent on doing my best at the tournament. Who knows, maybe I'd end up catching the attention of a super grandmaster. I tried to keep my preparations a secret from my mom, aware that if she ever knew, she'd try everything in her power to try and ruin it for me. Unfortunately, one day she found out about the tournament when she snooped through my phone. As expected, she wouldn't let me go, and I told her I was going with or without her. After a pretty loud fight between us that somehow included how I ruined her life, she told me to go to my room, and she locked the door. By the time I slept that night, I'd planned how I'd run off to my grandparents the day before the tournament and come back right after. The tournament was for a whole week though, so there was the issue of me getting into trouble and my grandparents getting into legal trouble, but I really didn't care about it. I was just intent on leaving. My phone had been finally seized, so I couldn't even practice with people in my community, and I had to resort to playing on the board games against myself. I found a way to perfect my plan to ensure that if I left the house, I would be the only one who got into trouble. I wrote a note with my mom's signature forged on it that I'd give to my grandparents when I got there. The day I was supposed to sneak out, I placed my bag with my things in the garage and went on as if everything was okay. For the first time in forever though, my mom seemed to be in a good mood. She had gotten home early and had bought some pizza and milkshakes for us. She invited me to eat, so I cautiously picked up a slice of pizza and ate it. Eventually, she started talking about how we were before I caught her cheating on my dad. How everything was joyful and fun and how she missed that. To be honest, I missed it too. And so we reminisced about so many memories and ate pizza and drank milkshakes. After we watched some TV and before I slept, she told me she would drive me to my tournament. I slept off on the couch with a smile on my face. The next day, I woke up groggily at around 1 p.m. I was shocked that I'd slept for so long and still felt dizzy. I could barely move and I kept trying to clear my head. I was definitely too late to make it to the tournament. And even worse, my mom was nowhere to be seen. After about an hour of dragging myself around the house, it finally dawned on me what my mom had done. She must have put some very powerful sedatives in my milkshake and fooled me with stories of earlier times just to make sure I didn't make it to the tournament. If I had any doubts about what she had done, The smug look on her face when she got back home that evening cleared it all. I was absolutely heartbroken. Days later, after I'd called my coach to explain what had happened, I finally decided that I would do something back. Something big. I wanted her out of my life. So with the help of a baseball bat, a belt, and a lot of self-determination, I beat myself up. I'm talking swollen eyes, cuts and bruises so huge you could spot them from a mile away. When I was satisfied with what I'd done, I hid the bat under a floorboard in the basement and called Child Protective Services, crying and saying I'd been serially abused by my mother. With the injuries, testimonies of our numerous fights from the neighbors, and a decent bit of acting from me, I was taken out of the custody of my mom and moved back in with my grandparents. My mom was charged for assault of a minor, and her defense wasn't strong. The prosecution brought up issues for my parents' divorce, including her drinking, and since the state couldn't mandate me to take a lie detector test, it was basically an open and shut case. My mom was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It's been 4 years since I saw my mom last, and honestly, I don't regret what I did at all. I mean, sure, it was a little over the top, but at that point in time, it was me or her, and I chose me. I mean, I think what OP did was definitely a lot, but when you're dealing with somebody that not only is mistreating you and abusing you, but is trying to deny you from doing anything you want to achieve in life, do you really blame them? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.